Hello and welcome everyone to the PhD Open Day here at the Courtauld. My name is Stephen Whiteman. I'm the head of the PhD program and senior lecturer in the Art and Architecture of China at the Courtauld. And I'm joined today by Alex Hawkins, who is head of admissions, and will be taking over in a little while to tell us more about the admissions process, funding and things like this. So we have about an hour today, I think, in which time I will endeavor to tell you a little bit about the PhD program, about pursuing a PhD in general, and pursuing it particularly at the Courtauld. And then Alex will come in and talk a little bit about the admissions process, some of which you may or may not have already started in the form of a pre-application. And then we'll have some time, hopefully a lot of time at the end for your questions. And if you have questions, I think we're putting them in the chat is how we're doing it. Is that right? And so please just put them in the chat and at any point as you go along, and we will come to them. Indeed, maybe I will open the chat. So in case there is anything super timely, we can just stop right there and address it. So without further ado, you are thinking of doing, oh, here's our name, sorry. I didn't know that that slide was there. You're thinking of doing a PhD. Well, why? That's a good question. Why do you undertake a PhD and as opposed to an MA and then doing other things? Well, if you're thinking about taking a PhD, you almost certainly have a very strong interest in advanced research. You are curious about questions in the history of art or architecture, and architecture perhaps, and or conservation that you haven't seen addressed somewhere else. And you really want to go out and find those answers. That's a sort of simplistic answer, but I think it ultimately is true that at the heart of this is a passion for the field and a real enjoyment in doing research, a real curiosity about the questions that can be answered through original research, and a belief in one form or another about the significance of the thing that you are working on. And that significance may take a lot of forms. It may take the form of really a sense that the historical question is a burning one in and of itself. It may take the form that the historical question relates to issues of contemporary concern that are really important. But no doubt one way or the other, you see the topic that you are working on, and I'm sure that I would agree, as being of real importance to the field and to people to understand better. And finally, and perhaps a sort of very foundational one, is you have professional aspirations requiring a PhD. That's not always true because of the relatively shorter length of the British PhD as opposed to, say, programs in America. You might also be pursuing a PhD because it's just something that you're interested in doing, which is great. But for many of you, a desire to work in academia or at advanced levels in the museum world or in other areas of the arts industry at a level that requires a PhD is what's motivating you to pursue further education. Now, what makes a good PhD topic? In addition to the things that I've already just mentioned, things like you're really interested in it and you really believe in its importance. The big questions are around making an original contribution to knowledge. That is sort of the fundamental standard by which PhDs are judged. Not only topics, but then ultimately, when you've completed your dissertation, on which it's examined. Does it make an original contribution to knowledge? Does it simply repeat what we've, in new forms what we've heard before? Well, that's not so great. Does it actually propose a new form of interpretation, a new set of facts, open a new window onto the past or onto the present? These are the types of original contributions that we are looking for. Now, how do you identify such a topic? Well, you often do so by identifying a gap in existing scholarship. And sometimes that gap is pretty narrow and pretty refined, and it still can be big enough for a PhD in fields that have been well studied. Sometimes it's the narrowest crack of something that hasn't been studied, or a question that we've gotten wrong in the past, that can cause much bigger questions to open up. Other times, the gaps are much larger. There are whole fields that may be unstudied, whole areas that may be unstudied. This has been particularly true, I think, as the field of art history has expanded in recent years, both in terms of its geographic coverage, the cultures and areas and regions that are now studied, whose artistic production or architectural production is now studied more and more by art and architectural historians and by the field. And also as we approach new methodologies, as we recognize the importance as a discipline, as we recognize the importance of hearing previously unrecognized voices, of acknowledging histories that have not gotten the attention that they ought to have in the past. And I say that in part because that brings us to the third point about what makes a good PhD topic. A topic situated strategically relative to developments in the discipline. We really want to support research that is at the cutting edge of the discipline, that takes on new issues methodologically and thematically, that breaks new ground. This is not only because those conditions are essential to making an original contribution to knowledge, which of course they are, but also because we want to be pushing the field forward, and we also want to train students who are ultimately competitive for jobs, who we can help get jobs following. And so therefore, identifying where the field is breaking, where the field, by which I mean sort of breaking new ground, where the field is evolving, and seeking out that type of new question and that type of new opportunity is really important for PhD topics as you're proposing. And a lot of what I'm saying right now is really about thinking about how you craft your proposal, and so how you think about what your topic might ultimately be. I want to give you a little bit of a sense of what the PhD specifically at the Courtauld looks like. The PhD at the Courtauld is generally a 3-year program with a 4th year, which is known as the writing up year, available for those who need it. This is standard across UK PhD programs. The PhD of to answer a question that's just come in to the chat, since it is a good time to answer it, the PhD of the Courtauld can only be pursued in attendance. You cannot pursue the Courtauld does not offer a distance PhD, and so at least in the first year you need to be essentially living in London in order to attend coursework and tutorials at the Courtauld in London. Students then in later years, as you'll see in a moment, often do go elsewhere to pursue fellowships or research, which is great, depending on what their research needs are. But in the first instance, and certainly in year 1, you are in London. In year 1, you undertake the beginnings of your research. You develop your project from what you proposed initially into what will be its sort of full-fledged and mature form. You take a year-long skills and methods course, which is actually what I was teaching. Apologies for being late. Where I was just before coming here was with this year's first-year PhD cohort on our skills course. In the autumn, it's skills. In the spring term, it is the methods course. This course traditionally meets Mondays, 10 a.m. to noon. Don't bet on that next year, but I mean, I would anticipate that that's probably what time it will meet for autumn and spring terms. Many students also pursue various types of skills development in their first year, particularly language development, we do anticipate that you largely have the languages that you need, or at least have begun in a serious way the languages that you'll need for your research. But many students continue to acquire advanced language skills or develop new language skills, such as paleography, the study of handwriting, so that you can decipher the archives that you'll probably encounter later in your research, et cetera, et cetera. Over the course of the year, you'll work on a variety of shorter and then progressively longer research projects with your supervisor. And then that culminates in the writing of your first year monitoring paper or your first year upgrade paper, a paper of 8,000 to 10,000 words that often looks a lot like a chapter of your dissertation that you're examined on at the end of the first year. Should you pass it, which we would anticipate, of course, that you would, you are upgraded from a MPhil, which is the status on which all University of London PhD students start, to full PhD candidature for your second year and beyond. In the second year, some people start to teach part-time. They continue language and other skills training, and then many go overseas for significant periods of archival research that is really central to the writing of their second and further chapters. The year culminates with a small symposium in which each student presents a paper of about 15 minutes for an audience of the students, PhD students and faculty in their specific area. Usually we divide those areas up by period. And so, for instance, the medieval students all present to the medieval faculty, and other students, the early modern students, the modern contemporary students, so on and so forth. This is an opportunity to begin to hone your presentation skills while getting feedback on a sort of next stage of your research, say chapter 2. Chapter 3. Year 3 continues this process with further research and then a lot of writing. And this is the year in which most of the writing gets done. It culminates in a public postgraduate symposium at which all third-year students present together. It's open to the entire Courtauld community and also to the London public, at least during non-COVID times. And you begin to sort of wind up your writing, if you're that far along, and beginning to prepare for submission and examination. Sometimes that process stretches into a fourth year, as I said, or even much of the fourth year, which is fine. That is called a writing up year and is a year in which further research often gets done. The Courtauld offers a number of really great opportunities and resources beyond just the supervision and research that you do as part of your PhD. The first is a series of events that are run by the Research Forum, which is the name for the part of the organization that sponsors and supports research and public events. We have a number of thematic clusters, some of which are period-based, the early modern, the modern contemporary, et cetera, et cetera. There are also thematic, a variety of thematic clusters around architecture, around Gothic ivory, around a whole bunch of different things. And as well as a number of research centers, particularly the Center for American Art, etc. There is a very, very active series of public programs. I would say during the peak of the year, there is on average a event almost every day, or roughly 5 events a week, I would have said. So a very, very busy public events program, which we really hope not only that you'll take part in terms of attending, but also that as you go along in your career as a PhD student, that you'll propose things to contribute. And lots of our events, both lecture series and symposia or conferences, are organized by current Courtauld PhDs or recent grads. There is also a journal, a postgraduate journal, organized, edited, and run by the PhD students at the Courtauld called Mediations, which is supported similarly by the Research Forum. Maybe this is, let me see. Did I miss anything that I want to say there before I hand over to Alex for a moment? There are also, as I mentioned, opportunities to teach on the Courtauld undergraduate program, particularly. Students start to TA generally in their second year. Not all students do, but those who wish to start to TA in their second year on certain courses. And then in their third year and beyond, often begin to take on roles as associate lecturers, which involves more substantial responsibility for the planning and administration of the course. Of course, there are opportunities to serve as a research assistant for professors, those professors who need research assistants. And then everything that extends in the University of London and London beyond. And so affiliate association with particularly the libraries, but also often with the departments of other University of London schools. Big art history programs exist at UCL, the University College London, the Warburg Institute, SOAS, the School of Oriental and African Studies, and a number of other institutions across the University of London. And of course, the museums and libraries of London are all places that our students are generally very, very active. And so all in all, before I hand over to Alex, I guess I'd summarize by saying that there is just a sort of really extraordinarily rich community, postgraduate study community here, and with lots of opportunities for individual growth and development. Now, I'm going to hand over to Alex, who, when you are ready, Alex, just say slide or something like that.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Will do. So I don't want to take too much time. So I can see we've got lots of questions coming in. That's really the thing that we like about this session the most, is we can kind of answer your questions directly. But there is something very important, a fairly significant change to the application process this year, which I'll go into a bit of detail about in a moment. So some important things to discuss. So the first thing, just to say that as you see up on the slide, the academic requirements for the PhD program with us at the Courtauld is an MA in a relevant subject, a 65% overall or equivalent, depending on where you're applying from, and in particular a 70% in the dissertation or thesis, or again equivalent. If you ever have any questions about, does your qualification meet this, or any kind of particulars about the qualification, that's when you should email my team at the PG admissions email address, which I'm sure we'll have a link to at the end of the slides. Alongside this, and kind of the most imminent deadline is the pre-application deadline, and kind of part of that is also the choosing of a supervisor. Obviously key that you have identified a supervisor who's suitable, or you believe is suitable. Often you might have even dropped them an email in advance of the pre-application. Sometimes you'll just get through the pre-application and kind of start to talk about the brief outline of what your research is, some of your educational background as well. But that's really key, that you try to identify the correct supervisor. It may well be that it's difficult, and there's some questions about who it might align to. Either you can select the one that you think is best, or I'm sure Stephen is always happy to kind of give some advice or some guidance if it's not immediately clear to you. But our faculty page on our website, and then the individual faculty pages there, give you a lot of information about the previous things that supervisors have helped, or their kind of research interests. So plenty of information there. And the pre-application is required to proceed into the next stage. So we do ask everyone to get a pre-application in. You should hear back relatively soon afterwards. I believe we're thinking there's about a week turnaround after the pre-application deadline for hearing about proceeding to the next step. And as I say, this is the kind of a significant change this year. We're going to be asking applicants to complete their application on the Chase portal. initially. And I'll start talking about Chase on the next slide, but it's sort of an inversion of what we perhaps used to do, where we would ask people to complete an application directly to us. Instead, we're going to be asking you to complete an application on a kind of an external portal first, and I'll get into the reasons behind that in just a moment. Perhaps actually it's a good time for us to go to the next slide.
I've already done that. I accidentally anticipated your needs.
Great. So talking about kind of funding opportunities, and obviously such an intrinsic part of many of the questions you might have about undertaking a PhD with us. The Chase application I'll talk about first. So this is the Consortium for the Humanities and Arts Southeast England, and this is how you access Arts and Humanities Research Council, basically kind of de facto government funding, full funding. So we are part of the consortium Chase, alongside a number of other institutions based in the Southeast, and a number of awards are given out each year in a kind of competitive capacity. And a change last year meant that the eligibility for HRC Chase funding shifted from being home in the EU only to now being open to all students. So we've decided to kind of streamline things a little bit, that you would just submit an application to us via the Chase portal, so that we have all the information that we could possibly want about the kind of Chase decisions we'll be making, kind of the funding decisions we'll be making in that sense, earlier than we normally would have done, so that we just have, you have more time to get all the information that you want on the portal. We have more information available to us. So then, pending decisions through the kind of January period, we'd be asking successful candidates to complete a smaller, kind of even more streamlined kind of dummy application, so we get some of your basic information on our records. But that's kind of getting into some kind of technical things. If you manage to proceed past the pre-application, we'll start to kind of give you more information and a link to the Chase application portal, and can answer any questions you have about that. Fundamentally, it's going to be the same kind of information, some kind of CV equivalent details about yourself, 2 references, and kind of a longer form version of what you'd be submitting in your pre-application about your research proposal. The Chase website has guidance about that. We'll be providing our own guidance alongside that, so you'll be able to see exactly what kind of information we'll be asking for. Alongside Chase, we have our own internal scholarships, which tend to open kind of in the February period, and we ask for those applications to be completed kind of in the approach to April. Again, we'll be getting more information about that on the website once we have the deadlines and the details for this year. But something is good to check back periodically. Those awards tend to range in the kind of £7,500 to £10,000 range. Attached to Chase are collaborative doctoral awards. I'd probably ask Stephen to go into a bit more detail on those, because they can be kind of, there's often different sources of those, and they're a bit more specific and kind of prescribed often in terms of the research. It's a slightly different category of research as much as anything with the funding aspect of it. And then obviously there are external opportunities as well. It's often as you develop your application and as it proceeds, it's often good to discuss external funding opportunities with your supervisor as well, as they may be aware of subject or geographic specific awards that might be relevant and appropriate for you to apply for, and work with you on that. That brings us on to some of the internal kind of support, namely our careers support. So the next slide, please. So kind of building through and kind of projecting forward whilst you're with us, as well as having, as much as what Stephen's talked about in terms of the program support, and also with Chase and a lot of the opportunities that come out of our participation in the Chase consortium. Lots of kind of events that run alongside that, and you can participate in. There's also our careers service. So we have a dedicated careers advisor who you can have one-on-one meetings with, interview practice sessions, and the period that you'll have access to that is even 2 years beyond the degree as well. So it covers you whilst you're here and afterwards. And it's benefit of being a small institution is that this is a careers advisor who really knows the subject area and can really get you and kind of go through history of art and kind of the specifics of postdoctorate study, and kind of really help you on that avenue. So it's a great resource to use whilst you're here. That I think brings me to everything I have. So just to end on, in terms of the slides, on some of the ways you can reach us. Some of our social media handles, and importantly, most importantly, not on here actually, we'll put it in the chat, but it's the pgadmissions@courtauld.ac.uk email address. And that, I think, is everything I have. I see there's a message in the chat just asking us to go back to the dates. Just to talk about the dates a bit there. So the pre-application deadline I mentioned, the program deadline, which will be the deadline for you to get everything from the kind of the applicant side up onto the Chase portal this year, will be the 4th of January. There's a bit of time afterwards kind of to process things and to release that to supervisors for review. The deadline for you to be interviewed will be the 14th of January. And then the kind of application outcome, the kind of the time that you'll hear exactly where things stand in terms of an outcome, will be in February. There'll be some more dates and kind of parts within this process that will give a bit more information about once you kind of get to the next step, and some of the the application portal and the ins and outs of the process during the kind of January to February period come out. We'll give you a bit more information as we get closer, so as not to bombard you with a million different kind of cut-off points and deadlines. But that's a general kind of an overview there of the deadlines for the application itself.
So thank you very much. We have a lot of questions, and I thought I'd just start working through them. The first is the PhD offered as a distance learning, which I did address earlier. I should caveat that within the United Kingdom, the PhD program, essentially, we anticipate that you live within commuting distance of London, which is to say that you can come to London on a regular basis. But what you can't do if you're an international student is live principally overseas while enrolled at the Courtauld. You can take leave for research, but you do basically, otherwise, you do need to, at least during your first year, be located in the UK. And that has to do with visa regulations, among other things. I just want to clarify that since I hadn't mentioned it earlier. So the next question, may I ask in general, what would it be like to study or work with my supervisor during my PhD studies? For instance, how many meetings per semester? What kind of support could I expect from them? Will I have a second supervisor? That's a great question. We in general anticipate that your supervisor will have you will have at least 6 tutorials per year with your supervisor, 2 per term. Some people meet much more with their supervisor. You aren't supposed to be meeting any less, and we ask supervisors to hold at least 6 supervisions. And often there are particularly more meetings in the first year. When I, for instance, meet in the first term, where we are right now, I often meet with my first year students fortnightly, very regularly, to make sure that everybody is up and running and doing well. You will get a lot of different types of support from them, including help shaping your topic, help with research questions, with your writing, help preparing for applications for various things, including jobs, but also fellowships, advice, professional advice about when the right time to start speaking at a conference is, or whether or not you ought to try to publish this paper as an article, or things like this. And yes, well, you don't have a second supervisor, you have what's called an advisor, which is sometimes in other institutions called a second reader or an auxiliary supervisor, among other things. That person generally has a number of tutorials with you, some of which are doubled up with your supervisor. Sometimes you also have independent supervisions with your advisor. It can vary from student to student. Somebody also asked further on whether you can have a second supervisor, which presumably is, you mean a co-supervision arrangement, where instead of having a supervisor and an advisor, you have just two equal supervisors. And the answer is absolutely. That also sometimes happens. It depends really on the topic and what types of expertise are needed. But as I think that transcultural topics become more and more common in art history, things that deal, if not in comparative histories, then in sort of connected or trans-regional histories, I think that type of co-supervision arrangement will become more popular. So yes, that's absolutely a possibility. The next question, is the PhD aimed at students who have undertaken taught MAs rather than MA by research? My sense is the answer to that is no, that it's open to either. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah. I mean, in terms of qualifying qualifications, then absolutely we would accept an MA by research. I guess, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, I guess the overlap might be that there may be things that you have, in terms of methodology, that you might have covered in an MA for research, that there might be a little duplication in the first term, or some of the initial kind of first year activities. That would be what I would imagine. There might be some crossover there, but otherwise, I think there'll be plenty that. And if anything, in my understanding of MAs by research is that it often is really prepared, and designed to get you ready for a full-time PhD. So if anything, I think some advantages there.
Yep. There is no age limit for applicants. It is, to answer the next question, it is a 3-year program, or what I often describe as a 3+1 year, which is to say that many students run into a 4th year and before submitting their dissertations, but that it is that year is you have to apply for an extension to get into that year. You're given 3 years, and then you have to apply for an extension for the 4th year, which is generally pretty available. And then you submit for examination. There is a period when your examiners, who are external to the Courtauld, read your examination. You then sit what's called the viva, which is what in America and other places is often called the defense, which is a discussion with your examiners about your dissertation. Following that, you have an outcome that leads to somewhere between no corrections, ideally, and 3, 12, or 18 months corrections. That is how long you're given to undertake the corrections that you have. You do the corrections that are required by the examiners and submit your dissertation for award. And that's the end. So yes, it's the 3 years, or the 3+1 is the period up until the time that you submit your dissertation for examination.
Sure. Just I wanted to add on the question about age limits for applicants as well, which was just to say that one thing I think is really great about our PhD cohort is that it's always incredibly diverse in terms of age, experience. The people who are going kind of quickly through degrees, there are people who take some time out, there are people who are coming to research, after careers as well. So it's incredibly, I think, to its benefit, a very diverse program in terms of the age of people who are doing it. There isn't, as I say, there isn't an age limit.
Thank you. That's a very good caveat. Where are we? Can you apply for a PhD when you don't have a specific proposal in mind, but you have an overall interest in a broader topic? If so, how to go about applying? The short answer is no, not in the UK, and not certainly to the Courtauld. The Courtauld application is based on a specific research proposal. If you have an overall interest in a broader area, but you don't have a specific topic in mind, that is an application that looks a little bit more, at least like a US PhD program, in which you start out with several years of MA level coursework, during which time you develop you refine your interest into a topic, and then go on to the PhD. However, there have been some questions further. Do you have any, before I tie to another question, Alex, do you want to add anything to that?
No.
Okay. So then there has been some questions about what sort of conversation you can expect with your supervisor. So this is a good time to segue to that. The conversations about your proposal and your application. So what's going to happen is you're going to submit your pre-application, and that's going to say in 300 or 350 words or whatever, basically what you want to work on and who you want to do it with. Admissions then forwards that. I receive, not I, the head of the PhD, but suppose you said that you want to study with me. I receive it and I say, oh yes, this sounds very interesting. I would like to welcome this student to apply to advance to the full application. It's also possible that I will say, this sounds very interesting, but it's not for me, or it's really not the right topic for the Courtauld. If it's not for me, but it is for another colleague, I will simply forward it to that colleague and say, this doesn't seem like me, but maybe it would work well for you. What do you think? If it's really not for the Courtauld because you're interested in a subject that is really not where our research strengths lie, we will respond and say, have you considered University Arts London? Have you considered a program in sociology, whatever. I mean, like we'll try to make some suggestions about why we think it doesn't fit the Courtauld. But assuming that it does fit the Courtauld and it does fit me and I'm excited, you'll then be advanced to the full application, at which time you and I will start to communicate. I will ask you to please send me a full draft of a proposal. I think that all supervisors do this. It does vary somewhat by supervisor, but it is my impression that all supervisors do that. And I will provide you some feedback that allows you to refine that topic. I will particularly point up the areas that I am concerned about. And the reason I do this, to frame it a little bit different from just an application where you have to apply and get in, is that what I want to do is assure myself that the students that I accept or that I recommend to the university for acceptance are really in a position to do this, that you have the skills and knowledge that you need, and that you're ready to go. So when I write back to you and say, well, gosh, like I'm really curious about what your sources for this are going to be, what I'm trying to do is make sure that we know clearly, we have a conversation about, are you ready? Do you know what the sources are? Oh, good, you do. Do you have the language skills necessary to do that? Oh, no, you don't. So, okay, so how are we going to make sure that you get those language skills, or you do? Okay, that's great. What I'm really trying to do is make sure that I help prepare you and prepare myself for a good fit for the program. Now, of course, there is an admissions process sort of baked into that, but I also want to stress the degree that at least I think that many supervisors see that this is a way of making sure that everybody is on the same page as part of the application process. So there is some feedback. How much depends a little bit on the supervisor that you've chosen to work with, how many times they'll go back and forth, but you should anticipate that. That's probably enough of an answer on that. Is the pre-application required for everyone applying? Yes, it is. I see the nod from Alex. And are you at all lenient about the academic requirements? I think that's a good question for you to address.
Yeah, so I mean, generally speaking, the requirement is relatively hard to set. If there are exceptional, extenuating circumstances, or quite often if you're applying from somewhere and it's sometimes difficult to draw exact equivalents, it's worth both discussing it and raising it as a question to my team in admissions, and also the supervisor as well. If they otherwise like the project, but it's kind of close, there can be some potential for leniency, but it really is better to try and just address it as early as possible in the process, both with the supervisor and with my team, so we can kind of discuss and see, especially if there are extenuating circumstances, we can discuss and kind of look at those.
Great, thank you. So are there any possibilities to change or amend the pre-application before the interview once we talk to the possible supervisor? So just to clarify, to return to that, So in between the pre-application is the opportunity for a potential supervisor to say, yes, I'm interested in seeing more. I'm interested in investing more time in helping the student develop this application. I want to see a full application, or no, this really doesn't seem like the right fit for me. Thanks, we're going to stop here. So could what you outline in your pre-app change on the way to a full application? Absolutely, but presumably it would change in conversation with your supervisor. Could you go from one thing to something completely different? So long as the potential supervisor was okay with that, that would be just fine. The important thing is that your supervisor, your potential supervisor, knows what project you're applying with, and so that they can help advise that, and then they're not surprised if they receive a full application once you've submitted it with something that's completely different from what they anticipated. That is not necessarily, but is likely not to end up in a successful application, because they won't have had a chance to think about it. Would I be disadvantaging myself if I submit the pre-app without direct personal email contact with the supervisor? No, you would not. Indeed, I think that the pre-app is in part intended very much in lieu of that contact. And so, because we understand that not everybody does just know somebody at the Courtauld, and that's totally normal, that you wouldn't know a faculty member here. And so we wanted to create a system wherein you could where we could gather the information that we knew the supervisor would eventually ask for. We could sort of say up front, give us this, and we'll pass it on, and then we'll put the supervisor in touch with you. Okay, so Lucia Pavetta has asked, you have mentioned that we should reach out to a potential PhD supervisor in the early stages of the application. Should we reach out to them before or after submitting the pre-application on the Chase system? So just to clarify, the pre-application is outlined on the PhD webpage and consists of a CV and a short proposal, about 300 words, and we tell you what it ought to address. The supervisor, in response to that and that is emailed to pgadmissions@courtauld.ac.uk. We can go back there probably if it's not that other slide. Whoops. Oh, sorry. Whoops. I went too far. Forgive me. Okay, let's go back. Our email address is not actually there. Sorry, but we can put it in the chat. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought. Then you will get a response from the supervisor or from admission saying, yes, the supervisor would like to see a full application, at which point the supervisor and you should be in touch. Usually the supervisor is in touch with you, but if you don't hear from them pretty fast, feel free to reach out to them. Because if they've said yes, they're expecting to hear from you. And the address is already in the chat, but we can put it back in several times. It is the full application that goes on the Chase system. And if you are invited to submit a full application, you will receive instructions about what that application needs to look like and how to put it on the Chase system, because it is essentially the Chase application. What we've basically done, I'm not sure whether Alex said it in just this way, is we've just adopted the Chase application as our application. So whether or not you're applying to Chase, you fill out the Chase application, because in essence, our applications were fairly close to each other. So it just made it more efficient to cause everybody to just complete one application and have it apply for all things. Okay, so yes, you will have a chance to hear from, you need to really consult with your supervisor in that intervening time. I think that to write a successful application, both for admissions and for Chase, it's really important to consult with your potential supervisor. Anything to add to that? Nope. Okay. So the pre-application deadline is the 15th of November. It is. I had received an email that the pre-application deadline was the 8th of November. Correct, you did. And then we realized that today was the 8th of November and we were only having this meeting today. And so we decided to extend the application deadline by a week. So if you've already put in your pre-application, no sweat. But you have some more time to do it after today if you'd like it. Information about the interview. It is a sort of a group interview. It's 2-on-1. It is your supervisor and somebody else, another member of faculty that they've asked to come along. And often, just to prepare you for this, often the person who asks most of the questions is the other person. The supervisor is, of course, quite familiar with your proposal already, having worked with you on it some. And so often what I at least do is ask the other person to ask many of the questions to make sure that I get a second opinion that comes from a somewhat more, naive or uninformed or sort of fresh to the situation perspective. Are we allowed to audit classes of the MA special options that relate to our topic? On the whole, the answer to that question is no. The MA special options are marketed as very small classes, and generally they are reserved for the MAs. Some supervisors allow their first-year PhDs to audit select seminars on their MAs, and we leave that largely up to the individual supervisors. And so it depends. My students occasionally come along to MA seminars. Other people don't like that because of the way they teach the MA. So I think it's variable. What you are allowed to do, however, I probably should lead with the good news, is you are allowed to attend any undergraduate lectures that you like. First year, second year, third year core courses, second year Constellation, which are large topic courses, any lecture course that you are interested in, you are more than welcome to attend. So many PhD students do that. They attend the classes, the undergraduate classes that their supervisors teach, and that's strongly encouraged. Or even ones that their supervisors don't teach, that they're just interested in. I teach Chinese landscape in the winter, and you're more than welcome to come along if that's of interest to you. May I know about the fee structure? Yes, that one I'm definitely handing back to Alex.
Sure. So we've actually just recently updated our fees for 22-23 on the website, and perhaps my colleague will just post the link to that page. The fees for a full-time UK student, I believe, are £5,600 a year. For an overseas student, it is 20,900. Then the kind of complexities and then kind of the differences between what is a home student and an overseas student is worth looking up on the website, because it gets quite complicated, and there's different ways of being eligible, certainly for EU students in a kind of post-Brexit world as well. There are different statuses kind of attached to that. So worth looking at our website for more information about fee statuses and eligibility for those. But that's a kind of rough idea there.
And now, still to you, when will we receive funding outcomes?
So kind of the period will be kind of March to April. So some of the Chase decisions are kind of attached to that. So the students that we nominate for consideration of a Chase award, and it goes into the kind of consortium, kind of competitive level of Chase there, that will be kind of in that period of time. And what we tend to do is try to marry our own internal Courtauld scholarships outcomes kind of alongside that, and then have the decision deadline for you as an offer holder at that stage to be shortly afterwards, like a week or so afterwards. So you have a little bit of time hearing about the funding outcomes before you have to make a decision. Because some of those deadlines get set or often change a little bit, we don't have the exact deadlines out right now, but certainly kind of going into the January period, we should have the more precise deadlines for funding decisions up on the website and emailed out to you probably as well.
Great, thank you. In answer to the next question, yes, you can enroll in the PhD part-time. Year 4, the writing up year, cannot be taken part-time. It only exists as a writing up year. But years 1 through 3 can be taken full-time, part-time, or some combination of the two. We generally only allow one shift in status from part-time to full-time or full-time to part-time. We don't generally allow people to go back and forth, but there are also exceptions to that on a case-by-case basis as needed.
Yeah, and just to add to that, students who require a visa to study in the UK, we currently do not provide visas for part-time study.
Thank you very much for reminding me of that. So to emphasize, to enroll part-time, you need to be you need to not need a visa to study in the UK. Thank you for reminding me of that. Apologies. There are a number of questions about specific marks or qualifications, etc. I'll just underline, yes, there is some flexibility. It's on a case-by-case basis. The standard expectation is a UK 65 for the degree and 70 for the dissertation, or a distinction for this dissertation, or whatever the sort of local equivalent is wherever you've gotten your MA. But on case-by-case basis, there certainly sometimes are exceptions to that. The next question, is it possible for one of if you have two supervisors or a co-supervisory relationship, is it possible for one of those supervisors to be outside the Courtauld? And the answer is yes, that is occasionally possible. It's something that if you think it is perhaps likely, is something that you ought to discuss with your potential supervisor right away. It is something that if you know from the start, you have to apply with that request, and it is considered competitively. So if the answer to that really is, by and large, it's unusual. By and large, supervision is by Courtauld faculty. But in cases, particularly in areas in which the fields of the Courtauld are expanding, we sometimes allow co-supervision simply because we recognize that we are not a comprehensive university, say like King's or UCL or Oxford or Cambridge. And so if you need someone who does X, we don't have a history department or a languages and literatures department next door that will provide that if we don't do that in art history. And so we do allow for that in some cases, but we have pretty high expectations for that, principally because we also anticipate that we can supervise our own students, and we like to do that. And so talk about that with your supervisor, or write to us with a specific case and we can talk about it more. Somebody's asked what percentage of pre-apps get rejected outright. I don't think we have any, I don't have any idea what the answer to that question is.
Yeah, and it is quite variable, I think, as well, as we sometimes get slightly more, slightly less. So it's too variable to really have a pattern on, I would say.
But I will say, if your pre-application is declined, you will get an explanation. We will respond. All pre-applications get a response. We don't leave anybody hanging, and they all get a response that indicates at greater or lesser length why it is that the supervisor feels that this is not a good fit. So I don't want anyone to think that they might send a pre-app into the ether and just never hear a response. That won't happen. Will all applicants who submit a pre-application receive a response following November 15th, or are they rolling? Basically, we ask all supervisors to respond to pre-apps by the 18th of November. However, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Alex, that we send responses on a rolling basis, so that as the supervisor responds to admissions, admissions gets in touch with you. That's correct, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. I think that Shen Chu has said that their particular school grades the MA on a pass, no pass basis. How would we assess that?
So that's the kind of detail where we probably ask you to send us more information and kind of actually send us some more information about the program in particular that you're studying, so that we can make an assessment, speak with the supervisor as well, and kind of look into it in a bit more detail. So I think if you could email more information about the course that you've taken and kind of how it's graded. Often you'll get more information, and you can request information from your current school about that. So if you send that to the PG admissions email address, we can take a look at that and share it with the supervisor if it's useful. That's probably the best way of approaching that, I'd say, because that can get a bit complicated otherwise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that goes for that type of scenario and any other similar scenario, even within the UK. I mean, you can tell that I'm not from the UK and didn't get my education here, but my impression is that a 65 at the Courtauld isn't necessarily a 65 somewhere else, like that our bands are slightly different. And so if there are questions about whether you were educated in Germany or in Scotland or in the United States, if you have questions about how it lines up, just feel free to ask. It's no problem. I think we skip down to can you start your application for the PhD before you graduate from the MA? Yes, absolutely you can. But you presumably should be well, I guess I had assumed that the person who asked this was on a Courtauld MA, which may actually not be true. Yes, absolutely, you can apply from outside while you are still on your MA. And if you are currently on a Courtauld MA and considering applying, then you should feel free to speak to your tutor about your application and about what they would be looking for and whether they think you're ready.
Yeah, and then just of course, any offer made would be conditional on meeting requirements. That would be the kind of additional slice in there then.
Quite right, thank you. Can I ask what the requirements for acquiring Chase funding are? Would you like to answer this?
Well, so as I mentioned earlier, I mean, one kind of aspect of that would be eligibility, and this is the second year of new eligibility rules where it is open to international students as well. So eligibility questions are kind of to one side now. In terms of other requirements, so in essence, the kind of intrinsic relationship between kind of Chase and our assessment for Chase and our own program are pretty closely linked now. And so in a roundabout way, looking at what the kind of Chase guidance says in terms of, submitting an application, looking at our own guidance, it should be relatively similar, and we're really looking for the same things. So it's not super separated out in that respect. We're still looking at things like preparedness for research and and for, as to questions as why you want to study at the Courtauld, why the supervisor, these kind of questions that are kind of part of the Chase application are really the same kind of questions that we are asking for the program application. And indeed, when we're looking at all applications now and making decisions on program entry, that's kind of alongside the narrowing down the students that we're going to submit to Chase. Probably worth saying that we have a cap on the number of students applications that we can put forward to Chase. So what will probably happen is that we'll have more offers to the program than we can actually submit to Chase. And part of the kind of review process that we undertake, our kind of an internal selection panel, is kind of working that out. And there can be a whole host of reasons. And part of that is that there is a slight cap on the number of international students that we can submit. So there were kind of questions around that. A lot of that, I think, and the detail of that, I think, comes out through when you start to actually cut the application on the Chase portal, discuss that with the supervisor. I think a lot of that will kind of lead into those kind of questions. I don't know if you have anything to add, Stephen.
No. We also provide we try to provide a lot of advice once, if you're nominated for Chase, then we try to provide our best support. It's absolutely, it's not only in your best interest, but it's in our best interest that you are successful in your Chase application. And so that's something that we work really hard at trying to support, with, I think, good success overall. And so, yes, once we're into it, you'll learn more about that. Is it, let's see. Someone has asked, we can pre-apply with an idea of who we might think would be a suitable supervisor without having spoken to them necessarily, but admissions can advise us the suitability of that supervisor. That's not quite how I would say it. If you don't know who a suitable supervisor is, please contact us and we will suggest one. But once you put down your supervisor on your pre-app, they will either say that they're interested, or they will say this isn't suitable for me. And if, knowing their colleagues' interests, they think there is somebody else who would be suitable, who might be more suitable, who might also be interested, they will pass on that application to that person. That is obviously somewhat more possible in fields of relatively dense coverage, like medieval or modern contemporary, where, you know, you might apply to study with, think you're well suited to Julian Stahlbras, and he might actually say, well, I think actually this is more like a Sarah Wilson project, than it is, say, in early modern, where we tend to work on very different things. And so the China person is not likely to pass a candidate off to his Islamicist colleague, as a for instance, because the fields are so different. Is it common for PhDs to be self-funded? I would say that it is not uncommon. But I also would say that we endeavor to provide financial support where we can. And so, so the answer to that is yes, and?
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, I think to add to that, you know, it's a PhD is a serious undertaking, and you know, thinking about funding and kind of making sure that you can undertake a 3+1 year, you know, 4-year degree is important. If you know, you don't want to place yourself in a position from the aspect of self-funding that is very difficult to continue. So if there are any questions around funding and getting funding applications in, you know, very important, and kind of making sure that you know, are in a position to continue onwards is really fundamental.
We're running out of time, but we have only a few more questions, so we can get through them, and anyone who would like to say, please do. Someone named Prasanna has asked, is there an option as a visiting scholar? If yes, can you explain the procedure? Prasanna, maybe you could clarify, maybe you could write to us directly about what you mean. In general, we have a couple of programs for doctoral students in various situations from other institutions to come to the Courtauld, but they're specific scholarship or support situations. And we don't generally have facilities to support independent scholars who have their PhDs. But if you're thinking about other arrangements outside of those, please send us an email, or maybe clarify in the chat what it is you're asking about, and we can try to help. Very quickly, a rejected pre-application does not reflect on any future, negatively on any future application at all. In fact, we often, one of the boxes on the response form is, would you encourage this student to apply next year? And it frequently gets checked. We understand that applications, or that PhD proposals are works in progress. And that sometimes students are not quite ready to propose something that we think is a doable PhD project. The difference between the American system and the UK system is that the UK system, when you enter, you start writing your dissertation. So we need to sort of say sometimes, you're about a year away. It's not at all uncommon to say, come back to us in a year, you're going to be ready. You have lots of potential, but your proposal isn't quite ready yet. Please go off and do some more work before you come back. And so don't take that as a negative at all. I think there's a lot of potential there. There is no age limit for Chase funding. There is no problem with the topic of your PhD being different from that of your MA in period or field. So the only question is whether or not you demonstrate readiness to write the PhD that you have proposed. That's what you need to demonstrate in your proposal. There is no cap on the PhD student intake per year. It ranges from between 12 2 years ago to 20 this year. And I'm sort of in that range is probably pretty good. And I think the last question, which I left to last because it was a slightly more substantial question. Does the Courtauld, for fieldwork, does the Courtauld help us negotiate special access to overseas resources? The Courtauld will certainly write a letter of sponsorship or identification confirming that you are a PhD student who is working on a project. But if you require special access, that is something that you would normally do in collaboration with your supervisor and other mentors. They would be the best positioned to help gain access because they would be the people who know. Typically, how long is field work? I think it varies extremely widely. I think that many people do different stints, anywhere from 3 months to 6 months. Sometimes they go several times. Sometimes students go away for a year because they get a fellowship or another type of visiting position. So it varies quite widely how long they're going for. I'm going to give you a chance, Alex, if you want to add to any of this. And during overseas field work, how are we supervised? Usually via Zoom or other types of remote call. Do you want to add anything to any of that?
Only that there are, just in terms of, and this is still something that we're developing understanding of as rule changes and clarifications of rules come in. But the relationship between studying in the UK on a visa and field work that is a certain length of time, and that's something that we're kind of developing as wording in government guidance changes quite often multiple times a year. So it's something to just bear in mind. It's absolutely possible to do field work and be on a visa, but in terms of the clarification of how long and kind of how things are supervised, that's kind of a slightly evolving question in many ways. But as always, we'll update and keep you posted on that as changes happen, or as the understanding of that changes.
Yep. By the way, I just want to return to one question that was asked at the end. Is there an age limit on Chase funding? Not only is there not an age limit on Chase funding, but I want to also stress that Chase, the Courtauld for certain, and Chase are very interested in what is in higher education speak termed widening participation, which means, among other things, that what we would call non-traditional students, and I hope that you will forgive the expression, people who are older, people who come from working class backgrounds, people whose family has not pursued, who do not have other family members who've pursued PhDs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All of these applicants are very much welcomed and encouraged to apply. And Chase and the Courtauld both are very interested in doing what they can to support students who fall outside, as well as students from minority backgrounds, students from overseas, students with learning disabilities. All of these are very, very welcomed and encouraged to apply. And so I take that as an opportunity only to expand upon the question of age limit, which is absolutely not. There's no age limit whatsoever. And indeed, I wouldn't know any way that Chase, or frankly us, would know your age, and let alone be concerned about it. Okay. Are there any other questions before we sign off? Okay, well, you certainly know where to find us, pgadmissions@courtauld.ac.uk. Please don't hesitate to write if you have any questions. We are more than happy to help on any of the above. And thank you very much all for coming. Thank you, Alex, for joining me. And see you all, I hope, in the application pool. And take care. Have a nice day.
Hi, everyone. Thank you.